Our next speaker is a good friend of mine, and his name is Neil Weinstein, and he's the Executive Director of Low Impact Development Center out of Maryland. And he's been doing a lot of work in the Mid-Atlantic region for EPA and for others.
What parade is it today? I thought the Mummers is in like November or something. What's going on here? Okay, so, congratulations anyway. That's good. So anyway, I don't know if I have any like quotes today, but the only one I was thinking is that some may never live, but the crazy never die. So, and sometimes when you do some of the stuff that we do, I think that's innovative. People look at you. It's great to see a big crowd like this. The LID Center is actually 10 years old this year, and it survived for some, despite my leadership. And I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, if you said LID or green streets or green highways, no one knew what you're talking about, and to see a room like this is very satisfying. So today, people's visions of green streets, I like to start this off because when people talk about green highways and green streets, they have very, very different opinions of what that could possibly be. And I think we touched on a little bit, heard what really transportation is all about, but what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background on LID and green highways, green streets, green infrastructure. We've been working on this for 12 years now. Since the beginning, we've really been working on this green streets, and there's some new initiatives, EPA and Fed Highway over the last couple of years, green highways, and how many of you have heard Green Highways Partnership? That's good. Need to hear, we'll talk about that a little bit, but you should write that down as something you should look at. Green infrastructure. That's something else you all need to really be looking at, and we were one of the signatories on that. I think it's going to be really something out, and green streets. So kind of like what's going on, and we're working across the country at different levels through research, through pilot programs and implementation on these issues, and some of the directions. So I just want to show this first slide. I like to talk about low impact development because that's really talked about a lot. And what we're really trying to do with LID is really weave a way to look at source controls into our infrastructure and see how to integrate this. I've seen some interesting design manuals say put LID everywhere. I want to kind of kill the myth that what we're trying to do is develop one piece of the watershed puzzle, because you have LID, you have gray, you have centralized controls, and you have restoration techniques. And put them all together and you have a very powerful watershed tool. The key to LID, and a lot of things that you're going to see today, is its technology and performance base, which is quite different from the typical stormwater structures we've been seeing. What we're really doing is making stormwater into a business. We're making it into an industry, which is quite different from the traditional approach. So instead of having a pond, and a pond is built the same way, we're trying to take a look at what is the most efficient technologies and let the marketplace decide, let the local region decide what it is, and let the market really develop the new techniques. Well, I say times are changing. These are very, this could be any city. This is DC, I guess Philadelphia would be the same. You just take away to the river on the right there maybe. Very highly impervious, very highly developed. And I think some of the issues that we look at, first is what is sustainability? I had the opportunity yesterday kind of to work with the National Capital Planning Commission on the new framework plan for the mall, not the Mall of America, but the mall in Washington, D.C. And one of the things is what is sustainability and how we're going to define that. It's very interesting because there's so many theories of the day. There's rating systems like LEED. There's, I can't even say the Brumfield, Awani. There's lots of principles. But we have to look at transportation. It's a very, very unique thing and how it integrates into these other things. And then we have some very broad issues, very popular issues that are transcendent and sometimes like global climate. I mean, that really didn't really exist a couple years ago. But we still have the challenge, especially in water and stormwater, of providing people with cheap, clean water. Okay? We still have those basic needs. And things have changed. A few years ago, you heard it's too expensive to do all this nice green stuff that you're going to see downtown in urban areas. Okay? But then something happened to gasoline a few months ago. Okay, people want to live downtown. They can't afford to commute. Downtowns are very, very important areas that people in the suburbs really are looking at moving into. Plus the whole issue, and we'll talk about equity in urban areas. And then CIP versus hedonism. No nightclub. The hedonism is actually an economic term. When people have gone from saying, how much does it cost? Because we look at things traditionally in infrastructure, how much does it cost over time? Do people want it, and you have to provide it to them. Okay, people want green streets, right? People want this stuff. So it's not necessarily, so it has to, there's this huge new way of looking at costing that we have to get interested in. And then is it about pollution? Philly's a very unique area in many places across the country in that there is a very integrated system where people are coordinating, and you have to, I'm going to have to give my friend Howard lots of credit for doing that, for bringing lots of people together, and I don't think people often, you owe me lunch for saying this. No, we're actually okay. Actually, it's interesting, Howard and I have really never worked together on anything. I'm kind of afraid to do that one day, but you know, really integrating these issues, it's really, really important, and that doesn't really happen, and people have to think outside their job, and that's often difficult, and sometimes competition, right? Who cares, Chicago, right? But when people see this is Chicago and Portland, what you really have to do is what are the best techniques for the way that you do business here? What's the most efficient, effective green roof that you can build in Philadelphia? What's the best way to build a road or alley? So that's what we want to try and do, is get to efficient systems for transportation. To do that, you have to deal with something called uncertainty and risk. Very important in engineering. People always don't like to look at that, especially a lot of this stuff, because it is hard to predict many of the outcomes here as far as implementation. And then performance-based, getting people to look at things instead of saying this will remove X or Y, to say what is the best, most efficient system for treating a pollution. Because that's what we've typically been doing in our permits is pollutants. But now, as people in stormwater, as transportation designers, you heard that term context-sensitive solution. I'm just curious how many people have heard that before. Okay, it's very important in transportation planning, but people don't always do that. But we look at water supply. This is a really nice document, Coyote Creek Master Plan out of California, and we're going from just stormwater to things like water supply, to environmental justice. How can you provide equity, green equity across cities? It's really important. We'll show some pictures. And looking at climate change. I always like this picture. This is Southern California. I'm not sure if it's infrared, but if you've ever driven out there in a fire, I think it kind of looks like that. Last couple of weeks I was out there. But looking at things like soil moisture and vegetation, they have such value. I always like to say, we're not really shameless self-promoters, but we did this thing on soil moisture and vegetation 12 years ago, before people were talking about how can you do large-scale areas in cities. This is really a precursor to green infrastructure, to look at treating stormwater, right? Some of the things we worked on, our first couple grants, I always like to look back. This was a Hope 6 project. It was one of our first grants to look at using the transportation network and the land use patterns in urban areas using decentralized or LID controls. And we came up with a series of templates. So once you come up with concepts, you can figure out designs and ways to build them. And we came up with some very simple kind of basic tenets, or how should you approach, or systems for design. I'm just curious, how many people have gone to our website? There's so much stuff in there, I don't know, but there's lots of good stuff. Hopefully you'll load up. And then how to take that into reality. This was a project we did. It's a transit-oriented development in Washington, D.C., Vienna, Virginia. And we worked with two of the nation's largest builders, I guess they're still in business, Pulte and Centex. And we put LID in a streetscape. Very interesting. We talked about risk and uncertainty. We actually had to do redundant systems for approval for this. And we had to do conventional and LID stormwater because the county engineer said, we don't know if this will work or maintain it, and it's a big experiment. And the developer actually came in and is going to do monitoring for this. But it's one of those issues of risk and uncertainty. And I was also asking the developer, why was he willing to do all this? And he said, this is a $1 billion project. It cost me $22,000 in interest a day. If I have to pay a little bit more to get it approved, I'll be just more than happy to do that. But they were saying, the engineers, that you couldn't build swale-type systems in urban areas. This is in High Point in Seattle. But they built it there, and it looks pretty nice. Or you could say we can have these open grates and systems and people run off the curb if you have a curb cut. And this is in a very highly urban area and local street. So people are figuring out how to do this, okay, and how to adopt that. And there's some keys to that. But besides planned things in cities, there's also unplanned growth, right? There's stuff that just happens organically. This is a suburb near Washington, D.C. It's an infill suburb. And when it was built, you would say, geez, this is an LID site. This is probably built in the 40s, old salt box, post-war. Lots of vegetation, right? Little runoff, look, even that disconnected drive. No cars, maybe one car, it's kind of older family. Well, someone buys this and does this with it. Okay, there are no codes, ordinances, whatever, to deal with that. Now there's maybe 3 or 4 cars and maybe more than one family that lives in there. A huge change in pollutant load. We're not even addressing this, and volume that comes off these sites. And so that's a big part. And this is near my house in Montgomery County, Maryland. I like this because a couple years ago, this house sold for about $700,000. This is in Bethesda. Now it's probably back to the 140 when I could have bought it when I first got married. But someone takes that and builds this on it, and it's $2.5 million. And actually, they give you a bathroom. They take away the porta potty. But this is causing huge flooding problems in the urban areas, right? And people with lots of money complain lots. So actually, Montgomery County, Maryland has done a rebate program and a grant program where they'll put in permeable pavements, surfaces, and they'll work with a contractor just because they want to get it going in the neighborhood. And some big impediments to really doing this. And I just want to jump a little bit. You know, this is the way we all learn how to do stormwater, right? That's changed. There's great firms. I know there's lots of people out there. Michelle, you'll have to raise your hand only because Michelle's done lots of great stuff. I don't know the name of your firm, but she's been doing this for a long time. It's just Michelle's place. So, you know, we've gone from this capacity model to water quality, and now amenity. And getting people to think in this mode is really critical. It's a lot of training. So when you look at this is out in Minnesota. We actually have some real nice rain garden templates and designs if you want to pick them off the website. But how many people would probably say this looks pretty nice, right? Right? And this is a retrofit. Okay, how many people say this looks? It's the C word. Okay, it doesn't look very good at all, right? Well, this first project was designed, of course, 4 evergreens, 3 engineer, right? 4, 3, 4, right? The plants. It failed. Now, I was bought out to the site and I was asked why this failed. Well, first thing I reached down, there was 6 inches of mud, and below it was all the mulch and bioretention soil. This is just because bad sediment control, and the design looked bad. And so there has to be not only the design, but understanding how to build stuff. Now, this project was a failure, and actually we designed it. I fail lots of times, purposely and non-purposely, but I always say it's on purpose, right? And here was an issue with the design was great, had the right spec. The contractor, the state highway people said, we'll inspect it, don't worry. The guy put mud in here, and he says bioretention soil. We said no clay or minimal clay. I picked it up, and a big clay clod came out of it. Okay, it's going to fail, and it was just a swamp. And then he said he was going to charge them, like, to dewater it, I don't know, like $4,000. And I just pulled the cap off the drain, and all the water came up, and he gave me a really bad look. But it's not good. So we're going to go through lots of iterations of this stuff, and it's not all going to be perfect. So how do you get there? How do you start building these green streets, green highways? Well, we started working with the Navy Yard back, our first projects, our first pilots, and we looked at technologies. And I always say, and I love this slide because it's the history of the United States in a pavement section. Came over, the shipyard, the Navy Yard, put ballast, used the ballast, the stones for pavement, concrete, asphalt, and all that stuff down there, the black stuff is oil spill, which made it a hazard site. So we had to line this site. I used to do some geotech work. And you can see here's the bioretention. This is really filtering device. And, you know, we couldn't put all the trees. It's a safety measure. But here, this water is retrofit and filtered. But the thing is, we started developing bioretention in a very, very urban area. And then we came with different modifications. How could you do very small areas of bioretention? Or how can you take other technologies such as a street tree filter box? This is a manufactured device, but how can you variation? Let's look at the impact in the process of vegetation, soil, and salt issues, so we can really start to look at these things that we're going to do long term. And then we took pavement projects, and we put them, for example, here, this is a permeable pavement thing that we did with interlocking pavement blocks about 10 years ago. And of course, all parking lots have to be painted. People can't figure out where to go. And this actually is, this lot's been here about 8 years. It's never, ever been maintained. Okay, it's not getting swept 3 times a year, but it still works pretty good, just some little localized clogging. So we start to understand how to build this, right? So we can take this pavement section, right? It can infiltrate water, and we can figure out all kinds of fancy calculations. Maybe if the ground is right, some of it can go down into the ground. Some of it can actually be used in ET. People are using blowers through this to actually look at increasing kind of air quality. Or you look at smog. We can coat this stuff with nanotechnology, right? We can use paints. That's an emerging science. So we can really look at how to make this even more effective for other issues, right? We can look at heat-light effects by different colorings. We can look at the energy demand. And then we can look at trapping trash, right? Because everybody still smokes, or some people still do. Or safety, right? But certain things we can't remove. You know, if you have dogs and you know, it's only some limitations, or pigeons. These you just shoot, right? Get rid of. But we can actually use this large scale. For example, the Port of Oakland's looking at, these aren't permeable, but pavement blocks, because it reduces the amount of time to repave over time, which costs money. But there's still going to be some residual pollutants. These aren't 100% effective, right? But over time, when we get the technology, people will work on getting that last percent. So let's talk about green highways, green infrastructure, and how all this stuff ties together. Well, first, how many of you design roads for a living, or streetscapes for a living? A couple? Oh, there's got to be a lot more than that here, right? How many of you have this document? Okay, because you all need to get it, because this is the National Academy report on using low-impact development and decentralized controls in transportation. Okay, and it really covers a lot of the technology that we're talking about. So when we take these technologies, how do you put them in the transportation environment? Well, one thing is green infrastructure. Right? So we have these things. We have bioretention, permeable pavements. How do we take them and kind of spread them out in a meaningful and effective way throughout the infrastructure? So we can take these things and put them in public and private right away and start to weave this functional landscape, just looking at one technology, right? And then we can start looking at how to get permit credit for it. Okay, how do we kind of measure it? How do we, and this is what people are doing now, how do we build it and construct it and maintain it over time, right? And so when you have that, you can start to have strategies. For example, this is a road near my house. This is Montrose Parkway. I live in another Montgomery County. We're about the same size, about 1 million people. And this is the most expensive road project they built. It's about 1.5 miles at $60 million. What's wrong with this picture here? The stormwater control is larger than the roadway, okay? And this is Class A office space. I don't even know how much this stuff costs a foot. And could that be more meaningful in an already degraded urban area? So could we use reforestation? In Maryland, we have one of the strongest reforestation laws in the country. We're cutting down trees to put stormwater ponds. Can we use permeable walks, bioretention, soil amendments to replace that function and keep this green? An important part is technology. We did these with the University of Maryland, and these are kind of advanced filters. Now, the neat thing about this is when we put these in, these are experimental designs, and when we walked down the street, all the shop vendors looked at us and said, "You're not doing anything more here, are you?" Because they had a streetscape program down the street, and it totally disrupted the businesses for months. And in an urban area that's marginal, messing with business is not good. But actually, we found we can construct these in a matter of days. We made them shallow. We didn't have to disrupt the utilities. They're very highly effective. But what's interesting, the state won't give us credit because this doesn't meet pre-treatment requirements in their state manual. But this is more effective than any state BMP that they have for the pollutants of concern. So the fact is that in urban areas, utilities are all over the place. If you use small-scale controls, they're adjustable in the field. And they can be put in quickly. Actually, I happen to be driving down, this is contractor world. This was a state and federal holiday. It was like Veterans Day. And I just happened to be down the street. What happened is the contractor offloaded the truck right in the middle, no maintenance of traffic, no anything, blocked all the lanes and put the box in. And this happens. You know, it's really important. Even in all construction, people are going to do stuff the way they want to do that. So let's take all this stuff conceptually that we kind of showed you, and let's say you have two kind of highway areas. Let's take all this, and what we can start to do is start to bridge those as we rebuild and look at corridors. And just to show you some things that this isn't all crazy, I know you're started doing this here. Portland's been doing this for quite some time. Seattle, Washington, the C Streets program, and actually someone who works with us now, Darla in our California office, was one of the program managers for this. What was interesting, everyone said this road is so expensive, right, when it was first built. But the second and third generation, they optimized the storage, they optimized the construction, and the cost went way, way down. Okay, and that's important. It's going to take several generations. It's going to take a marketplace. You know, if you can only find one person to put in permeable pavement, of course it's going to be expensive. But if the demand is there, the price will go down. But it requires, you were talking about all the guidebooks and all this. This is a 14-foot road, and I always say, here's all the adjacent streets to give it scale. And I used to be called fat, but now I'm horizontally challenged because we're in a politically correct era. But, you know, fire trucks, there's never been a house burnt down. People like it. It's traffic calming. You talked about how to get people to walk. People like going down the street. People take ownership of it. It's really very successful. We have green alleys, right? Everybody's going to come with their alley programs, working with EPA to come up with some guidance. And there'll be an optimal section based on the way we do business, right? And each city is going to be very, very unique. A couple neat green streets, green highway projects we're working on I really like. This is from a grant through Federal Highway and EPA through the Green Highways Partnership. And what we're trying to do is not just do stormwater in the right of way, but really leave the watershed better before. Use the transportation network to drive programs. And here, this is this is a really interesting site. This is where Marvin Gaye lived back in the 60s. This is not a very nice neighborhood now, but we're using the street as urban revitalization and stormwater, and we're linking it into the park system. So there's all kinds of really neat synergy here where we're using green techniques. These are just some of the schematics. And so here, you can see along the right of way, I don't have a laser here, but that kind of tan area is the road. We're putting bioretention bioswales in. And we can't just do this by looking at the survey. We have to go out, we have to look at the opportunities, we have to talk to the shop owners, we have to talk to the people who park. There's lots of churches down here. So you say, you know, where do you park? Well, on Sundays, trying to get a parking space out here, pretty tough. It's hard to tell people that we're not taking out parking spaces, but what we've done is we've actually put in permeable parking spaces, right? And work with some of the owners for access. So here's just some of the techniques we're doing. This will be constructed early next year. So how do you get this? Well, like I said, you can't just do this. And here's another street we're working on in Arlington in Virginia. And you can see here, this is a very narrow street. And we've come down and say, how can you take that straight sidewalk and maybe work with the owners a little bit and kind of change this to a better place to walk. And what was neat here when we're working with the landscape architecture team on this, you can see how the emphasis is not to have the street like this, but have the street come out, right? And the street really be part of the fabric. And then you can see here in the middle, there's that little circle is a bioretention area or a fountain, depending on our budget, a permeable pavement. So it's really a sense of place along where you're walking. Okay, and then when you do that, this is a really good document if you're interested. We did this probably about 3 years ago now. We took all those standards and put them into this Anacostia Waterfront Transportation Standards. So what has to happen is that these concepts, these designs, once we go through them, we have to put them into standards and specifications, and that's actually what we're doing with EPA now. We're working with several cities across the country to come out with some templates, because even though the pictures are nice, they look good, we have to have a consistent way to build them and construct them. We have to take very, very complex ideas, and we have to simplify them so they can be built in the construction industry. There's lots of good ideas, I always say, but translating them down to the guy who may or may not even have a ruler when he's constructing this. I always like this. This is one of our monuments in D.C. This is a big chair. There used to be a chair factory down there, and they left this big chair as part of that. So to do this, what we really have to do is come up with a system, and that's what we're really trying to do a lot at the center, is how do you take green infrastructure, green highways, green practices, and make them so they're from kind of, I don't want to use the term cradle to cradle or cradle to grave, any of those fancy things, but how do you take an action? Like, I want to use a bioswale in my transportation system. What do I need to design, construct, plan, get the procurement people to understand it, get the maintenance people to understand it, and it's really through this management system, EMS process. And AASHTO, American Society of State Highway Transportation Officials, we've done this through Green Highways, has a very good process, and we've adapted it to the linear environment. And so that's what's, I think, really key, is looking at not just doing stuff, but understanding how it's going to be built and maintained over time. So that's really our next step once we kind of do the pilot projects. And I really strongly suggest, if you're doing this kind of work, you should really start to look into the EMS system, especially AASHTO. So everybody gets to have their sustainable development model. Just have a few slides left here. Well, first, when you're doing something like this, what are the land use and economic design requirements? Okay, we can't take a 5,000 square foot lot and make 1,000 square feet of it a bioretention facility. Okay, we have limits to some of the technologies. We have to understand what we can push. We have to understand what's best in the marketplace. So what are our land use and design requirements to do this, right? What are the industry recognized standards? If we're going to do this on a mass scale, not everything can have customized designs. What we have to have is some industry recognized standards for materials, like bioretention soils. I know people are working on this, standards and specs, so someone can get it and buy it consistently, or permeable pavement, whether it's an ASTM, American Society Testing Materials Standard, or local standard, or Philly standard. We need consistent standards for this. And then we need ordinances and requirements. What is required? Is it a code? Is it voluntary? Right? How does it reflect what has to happen in the watershed are very key. And so once we have those three elements, we can have really localized sustainable development. So we can take these concepts and build them and have them consistently done and some predictability to them. So it's really performance-based. How does this stuff perform? It's not just a rating system or standards. It's about the way we do business is what we're trying to do. We talked about visions and quotes. I do have one big quote. We're doing some work up in Canada, in Toronto and Credit Valley, and I always like this. It's a little too long to read, but what I really liked about it is it talked about how stormwater fits into the greater impact of making people aware of their environment, looking at air quality, and really building a community. And I think that's kind of really important and really part of our mission, is that not only are we looking at stormwater and transportation, but we always have to look in the context of what we're trying to do with all of this. So with that, and this is the watershed, it's at Credit Valley. It's a really neat thing. And actually, if you look at it on the web, you can find that. Anyway, that's just my show. I just want to show you one last slide. It's a painting, because this is what it's all about. It's leaving a legacy for our families and kids and making a better environment. That's, my daughter did that. I have to show off a little bit of it. So anyway, I'd like to thank all of you, and hopefully I got you a little caught up on the time here. Thank you.